It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship this morning and to hear so many excellent speeches from across the House and so much consensus on the dreadful situation in Myanmar, and to debate what the UK can do to highlight and combat the terrible injustices and violence in that country. The last few years have seen no end of horrific human rights abuses in many parts of the globe, from Putin's brutal and barbaric invasion of Ukraine to the treatment of the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. And so Myanmar has somewhat faded from the headlines since the height of the Rohingya crisis of 2015. But the brutal repression and systemic human rights abuses do continue apace. The government should be acting with much greater energy on this crisis in Asia. As the government moves towards the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Arrangements, the CPTPP, in the region, so must the government act in keeping with the values of the British people. It is best practice in trade negotiations to include an element of dialogue in human rights. So my first question to the Minister is, what dialogue on human rights has there been from the Department for International Trade as they've been going about inserting the UK into the Pacific region? As the member for Bradford East has said, in the last 2 weeks we've seen even more airstrikes against civilians. The military junta is currently cracking down on an uprising where civilians are protesting against the Tatmadaw seizure of power 2 years ago and the ongoing loss of freedoms and violent repression. And in her opening statement, the member for Bradford West commented that since the coup against the government 2 years ago, the level of human rights abuses and human suffering is staggering. We heard this morning from the chair of the all-party group, who's been a steady champion for the Rohingya people, already an expelled minority, based in the Cox's Bazar in Bangladesh, the member for Bethnal Green and Bow, who has stood up year after year in the House of Commons, speaking on behalf of this particularly marginalised ethnic group. She's visited Cox's Bazar, where up to 1 million refugees live in poverty, creating another generation of marginalised young refugees. I know I speak for the whole House in putting on record thanks for the member for Bethnal Green and Bow who has championed this issue. She's challenged the Minister today on being more proactive on the International Criminal Court case to bring the Tatmadaw to book, and I look forward to hearing his defence of this action and what diplomatic efforts are ongoing in international fora to see justice served, and what assessment he has made in his relatively short period as a minister of the 82% cut to development aid for the Rohingya who languish in refugee camps, despite the excellent work done by other Commonwealth countries like Canada in highlighting the plight of the Rohingya. Now, returning to the desperate situation in Myanmar itself, the Burma Campaign UK, which has a strong track record in advocating for the people of Myanmar, has chronicled a deeply concerning level of chaos and destruction. The people of Myanmar have had their democratic dream snatched away. More than 2 million people fleeing their homes, with the vast majority internally displaced within Burma. More than 21,000 people have been arrested, with around 17,000 still in detention. Thousands of civilians and members of resistance forces have been killed. Here in the House of Commons, I've heard through the Human Rights Group of doctors who have been performing surgery in trenches in parts of Myanmar. That is how desperate the situation is for civilians in the region. The effective banning of 40 political parties by deregistering them, including the National League for Democracy, which did win the last elections, and significant ethnic political parties also discriminated against and had experienced violence and repression. The destruction of 60,000 civilian homes and properties, and of course the ongoing use of airstrikes targeting medical centres, schools, religious buildings and camps for internally displaced people. As the member for Congleton and Strangford have today mentioned in today's debate, the freedom of religion or belief is severely curtailed currently in Myanmar. She's mentioned the important work of Ben Rogers and his book, which was an initial very important for members of Parliament in the 2015 Parliament, called Burma, A Nation at the Crossroads. I'll give way to the honourable member.
I'm so pleased that she mentioned Ben Rogers, because when I was speaking of him, I didn't know that he is actually here present in the chamber today, and I would like to express my appreciation to him for that and for his continued support for those who are expressing such deep concerns about the people of Myanmar and their situation.
I thank her for her intervention, and it is wonderful to have allies and champions, but in the end it's the voices of Burmese people I know that he echoes in his work, and I think it's very important that we put on record the work that Burmese people are doing day in, day out in order to survive. Underpinning all aspects of how the UK should approach this brutal regime is to tackle the use of violence, particularly using all tools available to stop the arming of the Tatmadaw. Without the ability to bomb the civil population into submission, the military will be severely weakened, and the chances for dialogue and a return to inclusive civilian-led rule will improve. The single best way in which the international community can bring this around is by the ban on the export of aviation fuel to the authorities, as has been mentioned by the member for Bethnal Green and Bow. So could the Minister provide an update today on the progress the UK government is making on this important ban? I welcome the government's previously announced sanctions on this back in January, February of this year, and I fully accept that the Minister appreciates and understands the seriousness of this issue, but there's significant ground still to cover. The Minister will know I've repeatedly raised the issue of British insurance companies and shipping companies who may be either directly or indirectly supporting the export of aviation fuel, and I'm afraid that the FCDO responses to my repeated questioning has been very poor. London is at the centre of a global insurance and shipping industry, and we should be using this unique position to show leadership on this and make clear that continued trade in fuel with the regime is not acceptable. I therefore urge the Minister to clarify what discussions, if any, have been had with the industry here in London on this specific issue. I also want to press the Minister on the status of the Defence Attaché at the Myanmar Embassy here, and I refer the House to the tabled written question on this very topic before the Easter recess, which I received a response on this week, but I am afraid that once again the question has been ducked. Can the Minister be clear today? Have there been any discussions about the expulsion from the embassy to remove any sign of support or legitimacy for this vile regime? Finally, we all know that both regional and international action will be critical for success in holding the regime to account. I will once again urge the Minister to outline what specific discussions are being had with partners in the region to cut off the supply of weapons to the regime, boost the effectiveness of arms embargoes, and condemn the suppliers in Moscow and Beijing who are playing a key role in legitimising the regime and facilitating the ongoing chaos. Sir Edward, I'll conclude with these 4 questions to make it easier for the Minister, because I've asked rather a lot. The UK is the pen holder on Burma, Myanmar in the United Nations, with a particular reference to the welfare of children. First of all, what's the progress on banning the aviation fuel, which has been mentioned by a number of people in the debate today? Secondly, the progress on banning the insurance companies and other financial industries, which the City of London has particular role to play. Thirdly, undertaking to raise with the Foreign Secretary the concerns that a representative of that government, and we've described the actions of the government today, is living and enjoying a diplomatic lifestyle which is completely inappropriate given what's going on in that country as we speak. And finally, will he review the 82% cut to the Rohingya and work with Bangladesh to provide safe conditions in the immediate short term for the refugees, and work with other countries in the region for a decent future for that next generation? Sir Edward, the crisis in Myanmar may not be in the headlines as much as it ought to be, but the suffering of the people there remains in our hearts, and the onus is on us to match our feelings with our actions and show the global leadership which the British people want us to. Thank you.
Minister.